everybody. I'm Beatty and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty Show. And as those of you who have been listening to the Ask Beatty Show, I can hardly believe it. And I say this every single week. It's going into the 12th year that I've been doing the Ask Beatty Show here on the Progressive Radio Network. And of course, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also a sex therapist. And I have to tell you about the sex therapist role that I play is that almost nobody ever calls me about sexual issues per se. Usually, the presenting problems are depression or anxiety or relationship problems. And I think it's still a situation, believe it or not, here we are in 2024 where people still have a lot of difficulty talking about sex. But in any case, in my world, in my private practice here and in East Hampton, I ask all the tough questions, beginning with one's family of origin. So people who work with me, they know this is not going to be a tea party, nor is it going to be a bandage therapy kind of experience. But other than being a psychotherapist and sex therapist, and I've been practicing now for over 35 years, I'm also the advice columnist for Dan's papers in the Hamptons in Palm Beach. And for those of you who live in New York City, you're really able to get the magazine, and it's free throughout New York City. And I have to say, I think I've been writing some of the best columns. People will write in asking me questions about marriage and relationships and mental health issues. And this is now the third year that I've been actually writing to Ask Beatty columns and Dan's papers. And you can also, you can Google, if you don't want to look around town and try to find the magazine, you can actually Google Ask Beatty, Dan's papers, and you will be able to read all of the articles. The other thing that I feel so fortunate about is that not only have I been able to practice as a psychotherapist for so many years and write, but I've been able to also get my messages out on local and national television and radio, because I think that we can't speak too much at all about mental health issues and relationship problems, because the fact is that people are really continuing to struggle in their lives. And of course, there's a reality here. Whoever said that life was just going to be a walk on the beach? Although if you're able to take walks on the beach, that certainly does also help to really add something to your life. But the reality is, of course, is that we all go through so many ups and downs in our life, and nobody is immune. People think if you're rich and powerful, and I've had an opportunity over the years to treat the rich and treat the powerful. And of course, I began in the inner city areas of Montreal when I completed my graduate and postgraduate training at McGill University. And, there's simply a reality is that there's always going to be something. And yet, what I try to convince people to do is to not wait too long before people are really willing to acknowledge and address and resolve their issues. And people who call me, for example, couples who call me, many have waited years, sometimes 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Things have been off, and yet for a variety of reasons, they have not put the effort and not put the energies into their relationships and into their marriages. And we all pay a price if we don't acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can, as quickly as we can, without waiting years and years and years. to deal with the issues that truly interfere with our lives and our relationships. And these issues, they really do, they steal our joy. But here on the Ask Beatty show, and I hope that it's a motivational show for you where I can convince you and I can encourage you that if things are not going well and you've tried everything that you can possibly do to alleviate the depression or the anxiety or the relationship issues or the substance abuse problems, that you will give yourself permission and reach out and get good professional help. And that does not mean that you're necessarily going to be in therapy for 1,000 years. And just getting that second opinion, another perspective on what's going on and what's not going on in our lives can really make all the difference in the world, my friends. Now, every week, as you know, for those of you who continue to listen in every week, and I thank you for that, and I am grateful. I'm really grateful. You have a lot of options here, in the internet and on radio and on television. And, I really appreciate the fact that you take the time every single week to tune in here to the Ask Beatty show. So here is your weekly checkup. And I ask people every single week, sometimes probably people say, give it a break. But I think that it is important that we check in with ourselves and we ask ourselves, how are we doing in terms of our mental health? Are we generally in a good place? Are we on a good path? Or are we struggling? And as I said, we all struggle from time to time, but it's the struggling that doesn't seem to lift. That is the time when you feel like you're just going around in circles and you feel like you're on a roller coaster ride. That is the time to really be willing to take some action. So only you know how you are feeling, what your mood is like. And as I say, we don't need to navigate the ups and downs of life on our own. And what about your relationships? Ideally, you do have people who love you and who you love. And if you're feeling lonely or upset, that you'll be able to just pick up the phone or text or email someone who will definitely respond to you so that you don't feel lonely and alienated. But I think it's really important that we honestly look at our relationships. There was a piece in the New York Times just last week, and the headline is "The Midlife Marriage Tune-Up." And the byline was by Catherine Pearson, and it was therapists and relationship researchers share 6 questions that can bring couples closer during the stage. So when I saw the headlines, it was like a midlife marriage tune-up. Really, I think that we need to do midlife marriage partnership tune-ups on a very, very regular basis. Because over the years, I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of couples. And all I can tell you is that nobody, ever calls or has ever called and said, we need some help in communication and problem solving. I wish they did, because those are central issues. If we can't communicate and if we can't solve problems, that in itself is a huge problem that is going to impact every single aspect of our relationships, of our personal relationships, of our relationships with family, of our relationships with colleagues, of our relationships with children. So it was this midlife marriage tune-up headline. It was like, well, why? Why would you want to possibly wait, for midlife? I encourage couples on a regular basis. And I know my husband Jim will say to me, it's enough already, enough assessment, enough evaluation. But I want to make sure that things are on track. And having a conversation doesn't mean that you're going to spend hours and hours and hours dissecting your relationship. Although if you wait a long time, you're probably going to have to spend hours and hours and hours dissecting your relationship. But I think it's a good thing to ask, how are we doing? Is there anything at all that we need to talk about? Is there anything that's off, or are we just on this great path? And if you happen to be on a great path, please continue doing exactly, whatever it is that you're doing. It's I'll tell you a little personal vignette that happened recently. There is a woman in Canada, actually from Winnipeg, who I did a program with her organization a couple of years ago. I presented my Never Make a Mistake in Love program to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people throughout the world. And I had sent her an email a few weeks ago because I wanted to reconnect with her. I had some questions. I wanted her to connect me with some people, and I hadn't heard back. So the problem with assuming things without checking out. So I was saying to myself, wow, something's wrong. Did I offend her? Is she upset? Does she not want to, communicate with me in a collegial way anymore? So finally I called and I followed up with an email, and she got back to me and she says, I'm totally swamped. The Jewish New Year is, going to be approaching within the next few days. And I love you and adore you. And yes, I want to talk with you. And it was just really important to reach out, to check out, was there something wrong? And, in this particular situation, she was just really, really, really busy. So we were able to, come to a meeting in the minds, and, within the next week or so, we will be able to Zoom and communicate. But if you wait too long to deal with issues, we can assume and make all kinds of false assumptions about what's happening and what's not happening in our relationships. And sometimes, as hard as it is, it's really important to check things out and ask the person or the people or the group, are we okay? And hopefully the person or people or groups will be honest enough to say, well, by the way, what happened in our meeting last week, or by the way, I felt insulted by a comment that you may have even inadvertently made. But checking things out really keeps us and our relationships on track. So I don't know whether you have any situations in your life today, right now, that you need to check out, because we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble if we assume things without communicating our assumptions. They may be right, they may be wrong, to the people who we are assuming things about. So that is the relationship issue. And if we're looking at substance abuse, over-the-counter medication, prescription medication, alcohol, other kinds of drugs, how are you doing? And is it an issue? And are these substances that you may be taking, and you're feeling that they're very, very benign, are they starting to get in the way of your life? And if they are, it's always about, right? It's always about problem and paths to finding the best possible solutions. And of course, the perfect solution never exists. The perfect person doesn't exist. The perfect anything doesn't exist. And if it does, it probably does for a very, very, very short period of time. So it is really about being honest with ourselves. about our mental health, about our relationships, about possible drug problems, and also about our physical health. Are we taking good care of ourselves physically? We're still talking about an obesity rate in this country that is really over the top. And of course, with some of the weight loss drugs, I mean, amazing things are happening. Hopefully, there are not going to be negative side effects that researchers are going to be finding up the road. But so far, I mean, so far in reading about these weight loss drugs, things look pretty positive. I mean, even Oprah went on Wegovy, and I think that she's no longer the spokesperson for Weight Watchers. Now, that does not mean to suggest that we should only be considering drugs to keep ourselves healthy. We have to be active. We have to eat well. We have to get sufficient sleep. We have to limit almost totally alcohol and drug consumption. And sometimes this is tough to do, especially if we are trying to self-medicate with food, with drugs, which is why it is so important that we are willing to try to get to the root of the problems of whatever it is that is bothering us or really getting in the way of our lives and our relationships. And it's just easy. It's easy to complain, and it's easy to deny, and it's easy to blame and self-blame and avoid. And yet, we have, I feel, a real responsibility to ourselves to try to do whatever it is that we can do with help, without help, hopefully with a lot of support, to live our lives in ways that are really in our best interest. So that's why we need to kind of keep track of how are we doing, which is why I have this as a weekly segment. And hopefully this week you are feeling well. And if by chance you're finding that you are off track and you've been off track for a while, my question to you, my friends, is okay, we understand there's some issues here, but it's always about what are we going to do? It is about taking action. And by the way, I was just reviewing some of the literature on clinical depression, and I just want to read you something here that depression, and this may not be a surprise for those of you who've been listening for all these years, it has become one of the major public health crises sweeping the United States and the world. And this was even before the emergence of COVID-19. And you may be surprised to know that 1 in 8 American adults was taking an antidepressant. And according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that number rose by 18.6% during 2020. And in fact, there's been a 59% increase in the number of cases of depression, and listen to this, for adolescents since 2007. And of course, COVID only made it worse. So according to the National Institute of Mental Health, depression is the most common, and they use this word and not lightly, disability. Yes, it is a disability, and it can become a real disability in the world, impacting people's lives. And you look at, so why, what is this? It's more than just chemical. So you have a lot of stressful situations and loneliness. I mean, we talk about a loneliness epidemic and isolation and a lack of a strong and loving support system. And of course, economic difficulties and unemployment and racism and domestic abuse. It goes on and on and on. And again, you may be surprised. I was surprised to read these figures that the global market for depression treatment, including holistic alternative medicines, approaches to professional therapy-oriented solutions, and is expected to reach $16.14 billion by 2027. And as I've mentioned, we all go through ups and downs, and no one is immune from experiencing the feelings of sadness and loneliness and grief and fear. But if you're finding, and I want you to listen very, very carefully to this, that you are exhibiting any 5 or more of the following symptoms nearly every day during a 2-week period or longer, it's time to reach out to an experienced, yes, and I underscore that, mental health professional. So what are the symptoms again? Depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day. Significant weight loss when not dieting, or weight gain. And of course, you're going to rule out, physical issues that may be contributing to your low mood. 4, insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. Diminished ability to think or concentrate, and recurrent thoughts of death without a specific or a suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. Now, if any of these symptoms are really persisting again, and you just can't seem to find a way to feel better, again, I really recommend that you reach out to a very qualified and experienced mental health person. And people ask me all the time, so what should I expect? Well, during an initial consultation, which should last a minimum of an hour, not 45 minutes, not 50 minutes, not 15 minutes, you should expect to be asked, and certainly I do this in my offices, a number of questions about your current personal and professional situation, your family background, your relationship history, and of course, your current relationship situation, possible drug or alcohol abuse, traumatic events that may have occurred in your life, including any suicidal thoughts or gestures, and of course, domestic violence, sexual abuse, early child sexual abuse. And even though you're probably going to feel really uncomfortable talking about these issues, the questions that we ask are really, really important. They're really essential, and they must be answered honestly if we're going to be able to get a very clear picture of what it is that's going on, and more importantly, what the treatment modality really needs to look like. And as I mentioned previously, it's also really important to rule out any physical or medical problems, because sometimes a physical problem is exactly, it is exactly at the root of why you are feeling anxiety, why you are feeling depression. And you want to look at medications, over-the-counter medications, prescription medications that may be causing, we take a lot of pills. People take lots and lots and lots of medications. And we don't think oftentimes about what the side effects potentially could be. So there are medications that may be causing or exacerbating your depression or anxiety. So I think that you ought to really consider, just making an appointment with your primary care doctor. And I know, in all the years, and I think I've said this, I think I've had some reasonably good internists, primary care doctors, but there has never been a doctor ever, not a gynecologist, not a primary care doctor, that has ever asked me about my marriage, has ever asked me about relationships, or has ever asked me about my mental health. And it's, one might say, well, it's because she's a therapist, and if there were problems, she would say something. And that's not a good excuse. So that if you are seeing a primary care doctor, or if you are seeing a mental health person who has not sufficiently asked you all the questions that really need to be asked, we as consumers, we need to be proactive, and we need to say, by the way, this may not have anything at all to do with my depression today, but I want you to know that, and this is just an example, that I was sexually abused as a child, or I grew up in a very abusive family. So that the professional then, we're not mind readers. And yes, we really should be asking all the tough questions, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So that even though you might feel reluctant or embarrassed, or feeling some shame about some things that have happened and are happening in your life, in order for us to get the real picture and to be able to really help you, we need to know these nitty-gritty kinds of details, especially if you're seeing a mental health person or a physician. To be able to make a diagnosis and to understand what it is that's going on, and more importantly, what it is that we need to do to help you to feel better, we need the whole story. It was like one of the newsmen used to say, this is the rest of the story. Well, we need your rest of the story as well. I've been thinking a lot about the couples that I treat and that I have treated over the years. And I recently wrote a column, an Ask Beatty column in Dan's papers. The headline was, are you living and are you willing to live with a cheater? And most people experience a great deal of pain and loneliness after a divorce, death of a spouse, or end of a significant relationships. And it's one of the most unsettling times in a person's life, and it's perfectly understandable to want to fall in love again. However, in our haste to feel wanted and needed and desired and loved, we need to think about the consequences of starting a relationship with a married man or a married woman. And I found, of course, I've written about the extramarital affair statistics, which may or may not surprise you. So current research indicates that both men and women are almost equally, and this may surprise women because we have this idea that it's always the men who are the cheaters. Well, statistics tell us something a little bit different. And they say that men and women are almost equally likely to cheat on their partner, and this statistic that used to heavily favor men in the past. So what are these numbers? About 15 to 20% of married couples cheat. The rate of cheating increases with age for both married men and married women. So the older you are, the more likely you are to cheat. Of course, the older you are, the longer you've probably been married or in a relationship. 13% of women and 20% of men admitted to having sex with someone who is not their spouse while married. And I think that number is probably a bit low. What's new, however, is that there's been a 40% increase in the number of women cheating. Men are 3 times more likely to use dating sites and apps for casual sex. 1 in every 6 people in dating apps are using the apps to cheat on their partner. So that's 1 in 6. Most people who cheat have been married, and this is an interesting number, for 20 to 30 years and are between the ages of 50 to 60. More than 50% of cheating spouses, both men and women, say they confess to their spouse about their affair. Well, this has not been my experience in my practice in various different locations, including Sarasota and Providence and Montreal and here in New York City. What my experience has been is that the person inadvertently found, whether it was on a phone, whether it was a text, whether it was an email, discovered in those ways that their spouse or partner was having an extramarital relationship, and that people in my world simply did not confess. Men are more likely to report cheating on their spouse multiple times, and I have definitely seen that. And married men are about 25% more likely to report having one-night stands. And women, I have people who will say, well, we'll go to a massage therapist and we'll ask her for a happy ending. And I think that counts, right? You know, if your husband or partner went to a masseuse and asked for a happy ending, would you think that was cheating? Yeah, that's an interesting question for you. Or would you think, well, okay, that was just part of the massage. I certainly would not feel good if my husband went to a masseuse, and I haven't really thought about this, and asked for a happy ending. But that's just me. Married women report, now this is an incredible number. Married women report their highest rate of infidelity. Guess what? Guess what age? That married women, do you think it's 30? Do you think it's 40? Do you think it's 50? Well, it happens to be 60. So married women in their 60s are reporting the highest rate of infidelity. According to the American Psychological Association, the APA, infidelity in the United States accounts for 20 to 40% of divorces. I think that would be a number that I would say probably fits the profile of patients who I have worked with who ended up divorcing. Although I have to say that there have been, and this is maybe hard to believe, but that there have been very, very few divorces in my practice over a 35-year period. People who are under 30 and over 70 were least likely to divorce after an affair compared to those in their 50s and 60s. So these are, I think, really interesting kinds of statistics. But having looked at the statistics and having asked the question, are you willing to live with a cheater? I think even a much more important question is surviving infidelity, and should you stay or should you go? And this is another column that I had written for Dan's papers, quite some time ago. And this is a situation where this woman and her husband, they both thought, or she certainly thought, that they were in a committed relationship. She told me she loved her husband. She loved their life together. His law practice was thriving. They had 3 children. They had 3 young children. Everybody seemed to be happy. Money was not a problem. They traveled. She was able to do basically whatever she wanted to do. And then by chance, she discovered titillating emails that your husband sent to his longtime secretary, a married mother of two preschool age children. And what was heartbreaking for this particular woman is that the four of them used to routinely socialize. And she trusted her husband's secretary. They were friends, or so she thought, and she would confide in her. And lo and behold, she discovers that her husband is having an affair with the secretary. So her head is spinning. She's in a state of shock. Her life feels like it is absolutely unraveling. What to do? It feels at that second that surviving infidelity is impossible. She calls her husband and tells him to come home immediately. He asks whether something happened to one of the children. She says, no, the children are fine, but I'm not fine. The question then becomes, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? But let's go back a little bit. And even though the article in the New York Times talked about midlife tune-ups, let's look at some of the reasons. And I'm not legitimizing anything, okay, or saying that it's okay, but let's look at some of the reasons why people have affairs. Number one, marital dissatisfaction in some way. Sexual dissatisfaction, a desire for variety. I love my spouse, but a surprise, unanticipated encounter. You're at a meeting, okay? It turns into an affair. Do I still have it? The need for validation from someone other than my spouse. And I think a lot of people at different stages in life, you start to wonder, do people still find me attractive? Do people still find me sexy? Especially if you're questioning your own attractiveness and your own feelings of just feeling sexy. Or my spouse has a chronic illness and I need some emotional and physical intimacy. What about retaliation? I want to punish my spouse for having an affair, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to have an affair myself. Plain and simple sexual chemistry. You meet something and you know when it's there, right? But we have options and we have choices whether or not we choose the option of responding, or we say, no, I'm attracted to you, we have chemistry, but I'm married or I'm in a committed relationship and I am not going to go there. And number 9, consciously or unconsciously, I think that affairs are wake-up calls, that something is amiss in the marriage. And with all the couples, as I say, 99% of the couples who contact me because of an extramarital affair. And all I can say is that there have been issues for a long time, some big, some small, the birth of a child, the lack of sex, a number of different things that have contributed to one of the partners, and sometimes both, who have consciously made a decision to step outside of their primary relationships. So after the fair, there's always the question, should I stay or should I go? And my answer to that is that it depends. Because virtually every couple, as I say, they sought me, out as a therapist because of infidelity. And there's some questions, of course, that people really need to ask themselves. What will the next steps be? Do we still love each other? Do we still like each other? Do we want to repair what's happened over and above the pain and suffering that affairs always cause the relationship and always cause the person who has been cheated on? Will I ever be able to forgive? Should we get a divorce? Should we try and mend our marriage? Do I want to leave my marriage for my lover? I mean, there are a multitude of questions that need answers. Now, when couples choose to stay together or to divorce, you can expect that there's going to be lots and lots of ups and downs. But this is something, again, that I have learned in treating hundreds and hundreds of couples who primarily, sought therapy with me because of extramarital affairs. People can learn to forgive over time. However, they will never forget. Never forget. And the couples that I've worked with and that I work with, they're able to acknowledge that things have been off. They've been coasting for many, many, many years. And the reality, of course, is that after we fall in love and we perhaps live together, get married, there are a lot of other real things that can take over. Children and careers and health problems and money worries, just the pressures of day-to-day living. And these things, fortunately or unfortunately, they tend to occupy the number one spot in people's lives. And herein lies the mistake that couples continue to make. And I use the analogy that, plants and flowers, they're going to die if they're not watered and tended to. And the same goes for marriage. And I have often said, and I've tried through therapy, through talks, through television appearances, through my writings, to remind couples to keep the marriage, not the children, not all the extracurricular activities that people, if they're lucky enough to be able to engage in, to try and keep the couple at the top of the list of priorities. And it's these little things that make all the difference in the world, right? So I guess you can ask yourself, if you're in a relationship, if you're lucky enough to be in a good relationship, do you do these little things? In the morning, when you wake up, instead of complaining, do you say, I'm glad to see you. It's so good that we're together. Can we spend a little bit of time together, talking, reading the paper, connecting before starting our days? Do you express gratitude and appreciation? People, you tend to just kind of take things and people for granted, and it becomes a real, real, real problem. The last time that your husband or wife or partner, made you coffee, did you just kind of take it? Oh, well, yes, that's something that he or she does. But do you express the kind of love and gratitude uh, and generosity to somebody that you say that you're supposed to really love? Or do you tend to just kind of take them, just take them for granted? And that's a problem. So I'm asking all of you, if you are in relationships, maybe you need to do something tonight. Maybe you need to, tell your wife or your husband, You're looking great. I just want you to know that I love you. And I couldn't wait to come home to you and see you. And if those things are not true, and if there are problems and issues that are stopping and preventing you from feeling the love and feeling the closeness and feeling the connection, you have an opportunity. We all have an opportunity every single day to make some choices, to do something about it, to make amends, to try to repair the wounds and the hurts that have been created in our relationships. I mean, that doesn't just go for marriage or love, but in all of our relationships. Well, here are some points to ponder. You know, you've just discovered your partner has had an extramarital affair. Number one, are you sincerely interested in mending the marriage? The answer may be yes, the answer may be no. Is the couple willing to work with a competent marital therapist? You've heard me over the years, not all therapists are the alike and not all therapists are competent. Okay, so you have to do your homework and you really need to get a referral from somebody that you trust. So are you willing? Are you willing to do the work and find out what really led up to the affair? And even more importantly, you know, being helped to be able to find ways to move forward. Mending a broken heart. This is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time. And are you willing? And these are very important questions. Are you willing to participate in a painful process? This is not going to be fun, with the hope that your marriage can potentially be better and stronger than ever before. You know, I've been working with a couple actually from California, and he's had multiple affairs during the marriage. And yes, there were problems, and yes, the problems were not fully acknowledged, addressed, and resolved, to say the least. And instead of owning what he's done, instead of owning the hurt and the pain and the shame and the guilt and the rejection that his wife has been feeling, he continues to blame her. And he'll say things like, well, when we got married, you weren't all that sexual. And then we had the kids and you were busy. And when I tried to initiate sex, you didn't want to have sex. And, you know, I've been trying to get him to see that the lack of empathy on his part toward his wife is never going to help to try to heal the marriage. And what's so interesting is that, and I've been working with these people for a while, for whatever reasons, he has yet to be able to fully embrace and acknowledge the role that he played in the difficulties in the marriage before the affairs. And he is into this blaming game. And I think that this may be one of the few couples that I've seen over the years where I feel that the wife is the one who is probably going to say, you know, enough is enough. And, you know, you may find yourself in a situation where either you or your spouse wants a divorce. And if that is the case, if you played out, of course, the analogy is a tennis player, if you played out all the points, and yet you're not getting closer, the mending isn't working, the healing isn't happening, the people are not connecting or reconnecting, you may definitely find yourself in a situation where you are going to get a divorce. And, you know, all I can suggest, if that's the route, you need to find yourself a competent divorce attorney who will help you protect your interests in terms of custody, visitation, and alimony, and child support, and even hidden monies that you may not know anything about. And
I always try to encourage people that if marriages are going to be ending, to try to do it in the best possible way, to try and divorce well. Perhaps you didn't do a good job as a couple in your marriage, but particularly, you've had a long time together. Many people, most people that I've seen, have children and grandchildren, and at least be able really to look at yourselves in the mirror and say, well, we weren't able to make the marriage work, but we are ending the marriage in a way, in a dignified way, in a respectful way. And of course, had it been dignified and respectful, throughout their marriage, there probably would not have been an affair, and there probably would not, have uh you know ended uh the marriage in divorce. But then, I want people, there needs to be some takeaway. So the lessons worth learning, what have we learned, in talking about extramarital affairs and looking at the statistics and seeing the really large numbers, large percentages of both men and women who are cheating? What have we learned? Have we learned anything really at all? Well, number one, and I can't say it enough, to prioritize your marriage, to put the marriage, put your relationship at the top of the list of priorities. And if you find during your relationship that your own individual issues, be they emotional or psychological or psychiatric or physical or sexual, if they are getting in the way of your life and your relationship, give yourself permission to do something about it and get some help. We need two basically healthy people, emotionally healthy people, if we're going to have a healthy marriage. And that's the thing, that a good marriage is dependent on two, basically, nobody's perfect, two emotionally healthy individuals. Number four, when problems arise, and we all have problems, and problems are always going to arise, as they do in all marriages, take heed. Don't bury them. Don't deny them. Don't avoid tackling the various different issues head on, pretending that they are going to disappear on their own. And that is really magical thinking. So in the New York Times article talking about a midlife tune-up, I'm talking about maybe a weekly tune-up. I do this with you. I do this weekly tune-up. How are you doing every single week? And, maybe it's exhausting for some of you, but I think it's really, really important that we are honest with ourselves, and that we are on a path where we have clarity about whether or not the path is really a constructive path. So again, when problems arise, we need to find the way, we need to find the words, we need to make the time to check in and deal with whatever the issues are, whether or not they're money issues or sexual issues or children issues. Number five, if you and your spouse are unable to successfully acknowledge, address, and resolve your problems, how many times I have, said this over the years. I really, really, really hope that you will give yourself permission, before just letting things go down the tube, which many, many people do, to at least try and find a competent therapist who hopefully would be able to help you work through the issues past and present, so that perhaps there would be the potential that you and your partner, remember, you once really loved each other. You once couldn't wait to come home to each other. So maybe with effort and with good coaching, maybe you would be able to rekindle some of those early feelings. Well, everybody, that is my critique today on extramarital affairs and the things that we actually can do to try and repair and mend. Well, where is the time gone? 3:57 here in coolish, very coolish. I had to put on a sweater today in New York City. And I want to leave you with my two weekly messages. The first is for you to do everything possible to be living your life in ways that are in your best interest. And, if you happen to be in a relationship, again, to be making sure, to be checking in that the two of you are really on a constructive, loving path where the connection is the thing that is winning out versus the disconnection. And number two, the world is in a crazy, crazy, crazy place, forever thus. And I think that we all need to find ways and do a much, much, much better job in learning to listen to each other, to understand each other, despite our religious differences, our political differences. And each of us has, I believe, a real responsibility to try to make this world a better world, a more loving world where we can come together rather than continue to try to destroy each other. So I hope this was an interesting show, and I hope that there is some little takeaway that you will be able to take away in your own life and be able to use in some very, very practical ways. This is not a theoretical show. This is a what are you going to do to make your life and relationship better show. So have a very, very good rest of the day. And I will talk with you next Monday. I have a wonderful, wonderful guest, a superb divorce attorney, who I know that you are going to love to hear. And we'll talk next week. So take care, be good to yourself, be good to others. And I'll talk with you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.